Thank you very much, Michael, for that introduction. And it's great to be back in Mansion House. It was my home and office for my year, a very memorable year, as Michael has just reminded us back in 2021, 2022. When I was preparing for my year as Lord Mayor 2020, going into 2021, I was very conscious of the fact that here in the UK, we were going to have a sharp focus on the E in the ESG agenda, inevitably, with COP26 in Glasgow coming up in November 2021. It was very clear to everyone that the E, the environmental piece, was going to dominate conversations and our thinking in the financial services sector, and that would continue through into 2022. But I was keen that we didn't lose sight of the S in the ESG agenda, and indeed I felt at that point that it was going to be necessary to sort of elevate the discussion around the S, the social element of the ESG agenda, in the midst of that focus on the E. And why was that? Well, I think if you go back and you look even at the terms of the Paris Agreement in 2015, we were already then talking about the just transition, the impact on human rights, on labour rights, that the transition to net zero would entail. So when I was constructing my mayoral theme for the year, people and purpose, investing in a better tomorrow, I took that purpose piece and used it to elevate the S in the ESG. So alongside Net Zero Delivery Summit #1, which we hosted here in this room last May, I developed the concept of the Finance for Impact initiative, looking at how we could elevate the discussion around the S piece, think about how we could mobilize finance towards in that impact investing space. An exciting market, a market, potentially market of many billions that remains in a nascent stage, in a developing stage, but real potential for that market. And as we've been seeing today, I don't think we can divorce any longer the E and the S in our discussions, in our deliberations at all. So anyway, I decided we'd take the Finance for Impact initiative forward. I was delighted to have support in two key work streams, preparing for a conference, an event that we held here in Mansion House last July. I had support from KPMG, and Kay will talk a little bit about the work that she and her team did in the run-up to the conference, and indeed have continued to do since the conference as well. But I had support too from the Impact Investing Institute, chaired by Dame Elizabeth Corley. Elizabeth just arrived. We'll hear from Elizabeth shortly on that piece of the Finance for Impact initiative and the Just Transition Finance Challenge that the III led. We were building on some really good work which had already been undertaken. We were members of the G7 Impact Taskforce, which was chaired by Nick Hurd, worked rapidly, real pace, and very effectively to produce an excellent report towards the end of 2021. That's a report which was initiated and came out of decisions taken at the G7 meeting in Cornwall in the summer of 2021. So we were already working on a solid base provided by the G7 Impact Task Force, but also really building on years of work done in impact investing by individuals such as Sir Ronald Cohen. Really substantial, significant contributions to our thinking around how we can make impact investing work in both economic terms, commercial terms, but delivering the positive social outcomes that we wanted to see as well. And as I say, how can we have a discussion around transition finance, around the net zero challenge that the world faces, without interweaving into that the social element, the social impact that the decisions we're taking around environmental considerations will have. And we've heard that so strongly here today from His Excellency Dr. Might earlier on this morning, the African voice that we've heard from Somalia, from the African Investment Forum, and from Bagola as well. Really, really clear messages to us all from the Global South about the importance of getting that social piece involved in our considerations, in our deliberations. It's not easy. I will be the first to admit that there are real challenges in making this work. Commercial considerations, political considerations, all of these are factors which businesses have to contend with and work out how they will deal with those sort of considerations, those challenges as they take this agenda forward. Kay, I know you've been thinking about this for some time, both in your previous life as a MEP, but more recently in your role as KPMG and the work you've done at the work on the Finance for Impact initiative. You've been thinking a little bit about the role of the financial services sector in meeting this just transition challenge. Any views on that you'd like to share with us a bit?
Thank you, and thank you, Vincent. When you actually launched that Finance for Impact work last year, it was a really good opportunity for us to gather a whole load of people across the whole of the industry to really look at what the framework might look like. So yes, we're waiting for all sorts of taxonomies, we're waiting for all sorts of international standards, but do we have to wait? Can't we actually already work out a framework where this can actually be mobilised and can be happening alongside the environmental funding that's actually currently taking place towards net zero? And so that was a really clear message we got from all of the people we engaged with last year, was that yes, there are already things that can be done. You can already find ways to navigate this, and you can elevate the S alongside the E perfectly adequately right now without waiting for the ISSB's sort of initiatives that are about to kick off. Indeed, we will have them shortly. The consultations will start to happen. But the reality is you don't need to wait. We now know, with all the trillions that are going to need to be mobilised to actually achieve net zero, the vast majority of that, some 70% of it's going to come from the private sector. So that private sector needs to have one eye on the social impact as it starts to try and deliver those transition plans. And we've heard all sorts of people talk about how they consider them. But the reality for me is that just transition is a really good introductory step to actually having those social considerations alongside the net zero transition plans. And if you start thinking in terms of measuring social impact, when you're trying to KPIs that really work, you start to already have certain indicators, KPIs, that really work for you to measure how much you're really doing and adding value. One of the big things within just transition is making sure you engage really early on and very thoroughly in a collaborative way with all your stakeholders. And that communication is really, really important. So what we've done this year to try and make sure that that legacy that you started last year wasn't going to be lost was to try and go out into the marketplace and look for best practice. So what does good look like? And can we assemble some case studies to really go underneath the bonnet and look to see when it works, how much you can actually achieve? And you'll find on your tables right now a QR code at the back of your agenda. There's a QR code that will actually give you access to a catalogue of case studies that we've assembled, which will hopefully give you a real flavour. If you're starting on this journey as an institution, it will give you a flavour for what you can achieve. And if you're already on this journey, it'll give you maybe some insights into some of the things you could have done and should be doing and maybe will do in the future. So that catalogue is hopefully going to give people a bit of inspiration and a bit more of a cheer to get on with this and to really get some of that social impact consideration in their day-to-day work.
Yeah, it is a great catalogue. Thank you very much to you and your team again for your work on this, building on that framework, the principles that you developed last year. Any particular highlights, any particular takeaways from some of those? I've got one or two that certainly caught my eye.
So the real thing for me was to try and find different geographies. You know, today has actually represented that really well from all the other panels that have gone before us. It's really important that it's across different types of economies, both the emerging and the developed economies. Really important we consider both of those. But I really think it's also across different areas of financial services. This isn't just about the investor community. It's about the banks. It's about the insurance companies. Everyone has a part to play. So for me, there's a huge amount we had lots to choose from. So apologies, there's only a small sample in this catalogue. But the reality for me is that we've chosen ones that give us that spread, the diversity of projects. But I am Welsh, and so I have a bit of a partial to the ones that are actually happening in Wales, and I suspect you may talk about one of those in detail. But also there's a food strategy in there, talking about the importance about agriculture and the way in which we actually look at food. That for me is a really key aspect going forwards, where we can connect lots of different aspects of our lives and our communities together, but actually really figure out what the social impact is. But I've got two I'm going to highlight to you, and in terms of in the catalogue, the first one I'm going to talk about is Schroeder's piece of work, which is an investment framework that they have developed to analyse companies who have a real need to consider Indigenous rights practices, particularly when the land they want to build renewable projects for energy on are actually owned and may interfere with some of those Indigenous populations. That actually is a really important point here, that where you've got a serious overlap between land identified that is really good for these renewable projects, for energy in particular, where they need large amounts of land, where that overlap happens to be with Indigenous communities, how do you take special precautions to make sure you're considering all of the human rights elements that need to be considered? You're doing this in a really fair way, and you're bringing the communities along with you in particular. So that framework is one that Schroeder's have developed, but it's one I'd suggest can be extended to other areas as well. So I'd consider people should have a look for that. I think it's number 8 in your catalogue. And then you have one which gives you a Latin American feel here. And it's about a guarantee issuer. In this case, it's JP Morgan's project down in Sao Paulo, where they're developing the metro. And they have put in place a whole load of KPIs that look at the impact on the community that they're going to be building their metro for, and they're going to measure it. And all of this is really important. It's about data and measurement and being able to demonstrate the impact you're having. So if you think about it in advance, you put those KPIs in, and you are prepared potentially to change the KPIs as circumstances change and things develop. I think it's really important to keep an eye on those communities and to have the constant dialogue so you can actually adjust and adapt. So all of the details in that particular report. So please enjoy having a bit of a read.
Yes, it's a great catalogue. I could talk probably about all of them. A couple caught my eye. One is one of the Welsh ones, and I did think it was no surprise that there were at least 2 Welsh case studies in the catalogue. One involving Lloyds and a housing association in Wales, Adra Housing. Small scale, but it just shows again how these investments, a sustainability-linked loan, improving energy efficiency in homes in Wales, 450 homes being built, 350 jobs being created. And again, your point about measurement, about having clear, credible KPIs against which the social sustainability elements of of what is being delivered can be measured, can be tracked and reported. I think it helped that both Lloyds and the Housing Association have adopted the sustainability and reporting standards for social housing. So there was a common benchmark that they could use, establishing that baseline for the data. Those sorts of tools are very, very helpful in implementing this sort of framework. The other one on a completely different scale, and I like the catalogue because it gives you both examples of specific projects at different scales, and indeed strategies that can be adopted, such as the Schroeder strategy, but a much larger scale project represented by Macquarie Asset Management's 50% management. They have a 50% interest which they manage in the Port of Newcastle in Australia, the world's largest coal exporting port, with plans over between now and 2040 to make that to move towards net zero on that, at least in relation to scope 1 and 2 emissions, and to certain scope 3 factors. So work going on there, which is very interesting in contrast to the smaller scale projects. What I liked in both of those is the sense of the sense that practical steps can be taken. Because coming back to my earlier remarks, one of the things we come across very often talking about the S in the ESG is that it's very difficult for companies to get their heads around, and very difficult for investors and businesses to understand how they can implement in a day-to-day framework, in a commercial framework, how they can implement policies and practices and make investments that have meaningful S components to them and S outcomes, social outcomes, positive social benefits to them. And I think this catalogue gives you a very strong flavour of what is achievable, what is practical in this area.
So they've overcome some challenges on the way. It's not all been smooth sailing. And I think some of the lessons learned that are highlighted in those case studies are going to be really important for people to be able to actually not have to do the mistakes themselves. They can potentially learn from what they read here. But in particular, the key overarching point would be that when you start this, you need to prioritise that highly collaborative approach with the communities and with all the broader stakeholders that you're going to be exposed to. And having that dialogue very early on, and having that broad approach, collaborative approach, and being adaptive along the way is really important. If your assumptions were wrong, don't be scared to change them. Adapt, be flexible, and actually adjust where necessary. It's not a sign of weakness to adjust it if the programme needs it to actually get more impact in the communities. But I'm really encouraged. Last year when we surveyed for Finance for Impact, the broad range of financial services, 75% of the respondents said that they already considered social aspects when they made their capital allocation decisions. I'm hoping that we can get closer to 100% now that we start demonstrating this can be made relatively straightforward, and that you can learn from other people along the way. Yeah. So thank you to everybody who contributed. Really appreciate you being able to share those and allowing us to put them in the catalogue.
I'd agree with that, and I think you made a point earlier on about not having to wait for the taxonomies, not having to wait for the development of the sort of the legal frameworks, accounting and reporting frameworks. I think that is absolutely right. I mean, one thing I would be very keen to see is, as we develop, we heard Dr. Ma talking about the common ground framework. We were talking this morning again about the CCP framework for carbon credits in the VCM space. The more that we can anticipate and interweave into those developing taxonomies, into those frameworks, the S element to the ESG agenda, and indeed, of course, the G there as well, the more impact in the broader sense we will have as we move towards the net zero goal that we all in this room, certainly I'm sure all of us, want to see achieved. One aspect of, as I say, the Finance for Impact work I did last year was this work around principles with Kay and KPMG's support. The other was the Just Finance Transition Challenge, which was led by the Impact Investing Institute, by the chair of the Impact Investing Institute, Dame Elizabeth Corley, also, of course, chair of Schroders. And Elizabeth is here today to tell us a little bit about that with her panel. I will leave Elizabeth introduce her panelists, but thank you very much, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing an update from Elizabeth now on the Just Transition Finance Challenge. Thank you all very much.